All right, let's explore the subject of fossil evidence. Fossil evidence. I'd like to explore this with you because I think, in my estimation, this is the weakest argument for common descent between humans and the great apes. That we had a common ancestor 6 to 10 million years ago, and you can demonstrate this through the fossils. I think that this is the weakest argument from that perspective, and I'll show you why. I'm going to give you the best argument from that perspective, but let's start with the weakest. All right. Reasons why I think that fossil evidence is not very strong. Number one, the gap between the genus Australopithecus to the genus Homo is large and unrepresented in the fossil record. Now, immediately you're saying, what do you mean by the genus this and the genus that? So these genera, that's plural for genus, are the genus Homo and the genus Australopithecus. So let's take away Australopithecus, and that's the genus Homo. It's kind of the big tent, the big umbrella under which you have all of the different hominins from the genus Homo, hominins Homo. But if you look at the genus Australopithecus, you have different species under that umbrella. Incidentally, what you call those in the Australopithecus camp are Australopithecines. The jump from Australopithecines, that whole group of species, to the group of hominins is a huge, huge gap in the fossil record. Australopithecines are essentially apes. The genus Homo is where you start to see differences, and we're going to go into this further later on. Is Homo erectus human? Is Homo heidelbergensis human? Homo africanus? Homo neanderthalensis? I hope Homo sapiens are human. One of us needs to be. But you get the idea. Somewhere under the tent of the genus Homo and somewhere under the tent of Australopithecus, that genus, there is a huge, huge gap in between. Ernst Mayr, he's an evolutionary biologist, heavy hitter. He says the earliest fossils of Homo rudolfensis, Homo erectus, are separated from Australopithecus by a large, unbridged gap. How can we explain this seeming saltation, or a saltation in anthropology is a sudden change, sudden jump? How do we explain this? Well, not having any fossils that can serve as missing links, not having any fossils that can serve as missing links, we have to fall back on the time-honored method of historical science, the construction of a historical narrative. We know that we've got the Australopithecines before, and we've got the hominins after. We don't have the links in between. So what do? You create a historical narrative of how we got from here to here. Bernard Wood, he says the evolutionary sequence for the majority of hominin lineages is unknown. Most hominin taxa, particularly early hominins, have no obvious ancestors, and in most cases, ancestor-descendant sequences cannot be reliably constructed. Richard Lewontin, evolutionary biologist, he says, despite the excited and optimistic claims that have been made by some paleontologists, no fossil hominid species can be established as our direct ancestor. John Hawkes, no Australopithecine species is obviously transitional. Our interpretation is that the changes are sudden and interrelated and reflect a bottleneck that was created because of the isolation of a small group from a parent Australopithecine species. What he's saying here is they got into a little enclave, a little subgroup, and in that subgroup, a lot of mutation and a lot of breeding and a lot of generations occurred. And because of that, they changed quickly in that subgroup, and then when they came back out on the scene, boom, Homo erectus, Homo rudolfensis. They're coming on the scene and taking over. So we don't have a lot of bones, we don't have a lot of fossils, because it happened in a little area, in a little isolated enclave, and then they came over and boom, they reproduced like bunnies. In this small population, A combination of drift and selection resulted in a radical transformation of allele frequencies, fundamentally shifting the adaptive complex. In other words, a genetic revolution. Daniel Lieberman out of Harvard, of the various transitions that occurred during human evolution, the transition from Australopithecus to the genus Homo was undoubtedly one of the most critical in its magnitude and consequences. As with many key evolutionary events, there is both good news and bad news. First, the bad news is that many details of this transition are obscure because of the paucity, the lack of the fossil and archaeological records. That is what we call bad news. A lack and obscurity of archaeological and fossil records between Australopithecus and Homo. But there is good news. Although we lack many details about exactly how and when and where the transition occurred from Australopithecus to Homo, that would be good. Like if we knew how and when and where this happened, yeah. We have sufficient data from before the transition and after the transition to make some inferences about the overall nature of key changes that did occur. Now let me ask you, which one was the good news? We've got the Australopithecines before, yes. And we've got the genus Homo after, yes. We don't know how it happened, we don't know when it happened, we don't know where it happened, but we've got the before and we've got the after, so it must have happened. That's a historical narrative. That's not science. That's just filling in the gaps in your worldview, your perspective. So, this is why. Now, if you noticed, a lot of those citations I gave you, they were from top-flight evolutionary biologists. But if you noticed, many of them were dated. Many of them were dated, the 2000s, 2009. Here's my counter to that. Here's my counter. Whenever a new bone, a new skeleton, a new jawbone, a new cranium is found, why is it that the evolutionary community gets into an absolute uproar? Because this is still not settled. That's why. Oh, we found another skeleton. This is the key. If this is going to be the key, think about that. If this is the key, what does that mean? It means that this is not solved. This is showing that there's still a huge lacuna between Australopithecus and Homo. And no wonder everything goes into an uproar and everyone's rewriting paleontological history every time a new skeleton is found. All right, number 2. Hominin fossils are very rare and usually incomplete. They're very rare and usually incomplete. You can hop on the Smithsonian website. You can actually see a 3D version of all of the different fossils that they found. You can move it, look at it from different directions. Beautiful. But that being the case, very, very rare, very incomplete. Stephen Jay Gould, there's a young picture of Stephen Jay Gould. He was a paleontologist, evolutionary biologist. He said, most hominid fossils, even though they serve as a basis for endless speculation and elaborate storytelling, are fragments of jaws and scraps of skulls. Again, they find a jawbone, and what does he say? Endless speculation, elaborate storytelling. Henry Gee, he was the editor at the journal Nature. That's one of the big 3 top-flight academic journals. He's the editor there. He says this, fossil evidence of human evolutionary history is fragmentary and open to various interpretations. All the evidence for the hominid lineage between 10 and 5 million years ago, several thousand generations of living creatures, can be fitted into a small box. Jamie Shreve writes this, fossils attributed to Homo in the period 2 to 3 million years ago are exceedingly rare. You could put them all into a small shoebox and still have room for a good pair of shoes. Constance Holden, a Science magazine, another one of the great journals, academic journals, science journalist, she said, the primary scientific evidence is a pitifully small array of bones from which to construct man's evolutionary history. It is similar to that of reconstructing the plot of War and Peace with 13 randomly selected pages. Donald Johanson, anyone know what he was famous for? I put it on the slide, didn't I? He's the discoverer of Lucy, an Australopithecine, and this was a huge, huge find. This is what he has to say. About the time span in the last 3 million years remains undocumented by any human fossils. Now he's using the term human in a very elastic way. He's saying humans going all the way back to 3 million years ago. From the earliest period of hominid evolution, more than 4 million years ago, only a handful of largely undiagnostic fossils have been found. Here's Lucy. This was the great and awesome find, Lucy. And it is. Lucy was an incredible find, and she's an Australopithecine, and Johanson is credited as finding her, and it's amazing. But I hope you realize this is how many bones are actually discovered from Lucy. 40%. 40% was discovered. Now, guys, this is one of the best finds in history of fossil hunting. Lucy is at the very top of the list, and we have 40% of her total skeleton. Number 3, hominin drawings are very subjective. This is what drives me nuts when you watch documentaries, YouTube videos, you read science books, constantly. They make humans look like apes, and they make apes look like humans. This isn't just my observation. Jonathan Marks out of the University of North Carolina refers to this as, quote, humanizing apes and apifying humans. I mean, you see these pictures. These are Australopithecines, and they say, here's what he looked like. With $1 million smile, that's the way he looked. Other pictures. Some of these are humans, some of these are Australopithecines, holding each other's hands, so they have human behavior, but then they're also apes. I feel like it's misleading, and I feel like it's subjective. I think the science community, especially the media, want to bring science to the popular level, and for that, I'm very grateful. It's very respectable. The problem is when you're overreaching to the point where you're losing clarity. If you're making it so simple, if you're making it so accessible that you're actually missing the facts, that's where you're going too far. Number 4, we're moving a little bit out of the fossil evidence, but I have to. I got to do it. I have to. When we're saying that we're moving from the genus Australopithecus to the genus Homo, and this happened in a couple million years, plenty of time to get a Homo erectus or Rudolfensis, plenty of time. No, not plenty of time. Think of all of the differences between essentially an ape, Australopithecine, walking on its knuckles, bent over, an ape, climbing in the trees, so forth. To move over from that to something that, not even talking about a human, just something that stands upright, that walks, Homo erectus, standing erect. How many anatomical features would you need to change? Now, I would say if you took my car, and actually we're down to one car. You took my wife's car, and I took it to some engineers, and I said to those engineers, I want this thing to be a submarine. I think they could turn it into a submarine. I really do. But I think they would have to change many features of that car to turn it into a submarine. Are you with me? Here, we're seeing that moving just from essentially an ape, Australopithecus, over to something that stands upright. We're not even talking about abstract thought, theory of mind, art, none of that. Standing upright. You need 16 new anatomical features. You need the shoulders to be totally redesigned and reframed. You need a new rib cage. You need a new spine. You need a new pelvis. You need new hips, new legs, new arms, new hands, new feet. Just think about that. You move from moving on all fours to walking on your feet. all of the different nerve endings, and there's just in the feet. That's how many different anatomical features you need. How many mutations would you need to go into each one of those 16 anatomical features? Here's Ann Gager. She writes this. She says, the waiting time for 7 coordinated neutral mutations to arise in a bacterial population, not a human or hominin or Australopithecine population, in a bacterial population to get 7 neutral mutations that work their way into the population. They're not deleterious, they're not harmful, but they're neutral and they change the bacterium. How many years would you have to wait? 10 to the 27th. A 1 with 27 zeros after it. Now, Gager is as a biologist. She's trained at Harvard. She did postdoc work at MIT. Okay, she knows what she's talking about. And we're saying that's just for bacteria. We're not bacteria. That's a big problem. Bacteria, they have thousands of generations per year. Their offspring, the bacteria offspring, going from one bacterium to another, that generation cycle is lightning quick. Look at the research of Richard Lenski, where he's studying how bacteria, the generational changes, and he's in Michigan University. Basically, he's showing that you can have this many generations and you can do it very, very, very quickly. You don't have to wait 15 to 20 years for puberty and finding a wife and mating together, and then they get a wife. You don't have to wait that long. A bacterium can replicate super quickly. And bacteria, there's billions of them, huge population size. So that's really good. This is key evolutionary gold here. That's what we have. Big population and quick generations. That means lots of mutation, lots of selection, and at the end of it, you would have a lot of change. That's in bacteria. What about humans? Your generations aren't minutes or hours or whatever. Your generations for humans are 15 to 20 years. And at this point, we only had 10,000. When we speak of Homo erectus and we speak of all these different hominins, we're not talking about millions of them. We're talking about in the tens of thousands. So Gager concludes that just to have one beneficial mutation, you need 6 million years. To have 2 working in concert, you need 216 million years to move from Australopithecines to hominins. Finally, people will line up. I saw a debate one time. It was, they just lined up the skulls, moving from Australopithecus to Homo sapiens. Look at the skulls. I know this cranium only has 400 cubic centimeters, and this one has 1,400 cubic centimeters. And, I know that there's some changes, but look, you just look at all the skulls. And the debater was just saying, look at it. What he was appealing to there is what they refer to as homology. Homology. Here's another key example. This is going outside of our purposes, but a good example of homology is the hand. You've got 5 digits in the human and in the cat and also in the whale. What are those 5 digits doing in a whale flipper? What's that doing there? In a bat, why would it need it for a wing? That's homology. You got 5 digits inside each one of these animals. Homology. And you look at, I remember going to the zoo years ago, and I was pounding on the glass, pounding on the glass. Of course, the sign said, do not pound on the glass. So I'm pounding on the glass, and I'm going, thud, 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 And I turn around, I put my back to the glass. I'm talking to my buddy, and my buddy's eyes get about as big as watermelons, I turn around, and just then, that big gorilla just went, wham, right on the glass, right by my head. His palm was like that big. I just about came out of my shorts. It was it's a scary moment. And he was just letting me know that he was the king of the jungle, So anyways, going through the zoo, you'd look at these, apes and chimpanzees, and you'd look at their pecs, their delts, they're like superhuman. Their eyes, their face, their teeth. How can you say that we're not related to them? Well, when you say that, you're appealing to homology. Homology. That because they look alike, therefore, that means that we're related. And there's some truth in this. If you see My two kids, they're 2.5 years apart. Everyone always says, "Are you twins?" And it's like, no, I know, they look alike. And you see identical twins. They look alike, therefore they're related. Is that true universally? Well, let's read from Tim Barra, professor of evolutionary biology at The Ohio State University. He says, if you compare a 1953 and a 1954 Corvette side by side, then a 1954 Corvette and a 1955 Corvette, and so on, the descent with modification is overwhelmingly obvious. The evidence is so solid and comprehensive, it cannot be denied by reasonable people. And he's right about that. I mean, you look at that. Here's a 1953 Corvette, a 1954 Corvette, a 1955 Corvette. You can see there's differences, but essentially they're homologous, aren't they? And then a 1965 Corvette, 1975 Corvette, 85 Corvette, 95 Corvette. Okay, there's differences, but essentially they're homologous. Let's keep going. A 2005 Corvette, a 2015 Corvette, and then a 2024 Corvette. They're homologous. Do you see the problem with this line of thinking? This isn't evidence of common descent. This is evidence of common design. The 1953 Corvette did not give birth to the 1954 Corvette. The 1954 Corvette did not court a young 1954 Corvette, fall in love, get married, and 9 months later out popped the 1955 Corvette. No, the engineers at Chevy designed all these, and they designed them over time, and they designed them with certain features, and they designed them for certain purposes. This has been referred to as Barra's blunder. Barra's blunder. And this could also be an example of what's called convergent evolution. People say, well, we're homologous with the great apes, or we're homologous with bats and whales. We all have the same digits in our hand. But wait a minute. Neo-Darwinists will say that there is convergent evolution. What is that? Well, that means that when you look at the phylogenetic tree, I guess I should go like this. Phylogenetic tree, you go from the last universal common ancestor, it goes out, and you've got the octopus over here, and you've got Homo sapiens over here. Did the creation or the evolution of the eye in the octopus in any way lead to the creation of the eye in Homo sapiens? Answer, no. They're on totally different branches of the tree of life. This is a case of convergent evolution, that the octopus and the bonobo and the great apes and the fish, and they developed and they evolved eyes separately, totally independent of one another. Some sources I've read have said that the eye has evolved separately on Earth somewhere between 8 and 9 different ways and different times. Convergent evolution. So when you look at those different cases, we would say, well, that means that the octopus and the human are related. Well, no, but they're homologous. They both have eyes. I know, dummy, but they're on different parts of the tree of life. So just because they're homologous doesn't mean that they're related. Do you see where I'm going with this? Homology is evidence of common descent when the species is an ancestor on the tree of life. But homology is not evidence of common descent if the species is not an ancestor on the tree of life. This whole part of evolutionary thinking is being completely scoured right now in the literature. They're saying it's a case of circular reasoning. Well, how do you know that they're related? Because of homology. But you just said that homology is not a proof of interrelation because it could be different parts of the tree of life. Yes, but these are on the same tree, branch of the tree of life. Therefore, this homology does prove common descent. It's begging the question. It's assuming what you're trying to prove. We could take homology out of the picture and stick in anything, and you would still come to the same conclusion.